This Week in Parasitism is brought to you by the American Society for Microbiology at microbeworld.org/TWiP. This Week in Parasitism, episode number 95, recorded on September 16th, 2015. Hi, everybody. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and with me is Dickson Despommier.
Hello, Vincent.
And Daniel Griffin.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to me.
That's pretty weird there. Oh, boy. Welcome to me. What's in your coffee?
Today has been a long day.
Today has been a long.
Should we stop right now?
Maybe that's the name of the show. Today has been a long day.
I'm looking forward to this. This will be pleasant, I think.
This is comparison. A break.
Yes.
This episode is sponsored by ASM Gap. They want you to know about the ASM Scientific Writing and Publishing Webinar Series, a 3-month, 6-part program that will take place from January to March of 2016. And I think you should do this, Dickson.
Right. I probably could use the experience here.
And polish your papers up, you know.
Polish my papers.
This is a webinar that will teach you all about scientific writing and the publishing process. You're going to learn from ASM journal editors. Mm-hmm. The topics you'll hear about it will include the title in the abstract, the figures and the legends, the review process. You will learn how to write a good title.
I think everybody that's a graduate student should take this requirement.
Because not everyone is Alan Dove.
This should be required for every graduate student.
Over the head.
No.
This 3-month, 6-part series, it's a webinar. You can stay home or in the lab or in your favorite Starbucks. You have to apply to get in. The deadline is December 1st, so there's a lot of time.
Yeah.
You can go to bit.ly/SWPI online 15. That's all one word. bit.ly/SWPI online 15. Check it out. We thank ASM Gap for their support of TWiP. All right, we have some veritable follow-up.
Really?
Not just case guessing.
Some corrective follow-up.
But we have several. All right, the first one is from Ruben, who writes, Dear Day TWiPers, I am a big fan of TWiP. You do so many things right that a little problem in your TWiP 94 broadcast is not a big deal. As you may already know, all 3 drugs in the Nut Minute I'll study are small molecules, not monoclonals. They are TNIBs, not MABs. That is why they work on an intracellular target, the tyrosine kinase domain. Vincent had the right questions and hesitations about what was claimed to be an orally available antibody, but Dickson and Daniel convinced him that it should be fine with the right capsule. Sad face. A good lesson from this situation is that it would be a good habit for at least one of you to check the facts with Wikipedia as they emerge, and doubly so if there is even a slight doubt, especially outside the area of expertise of the 3 co-hosts. Keep up the good work, and please continue in the future. You may consider including a pharmaceutical chemist every now and then.
Little plug.
You know, the funny thing is, this is my fault entirely. I was looking at the Wikipedia page while we were discussing it, and I'm looking at this tyrosine. They have the crystal structure of tyrosine kinase with this inhibitor in it. It's clearly a small molecule. There's no way it was a monoclonal. I'm looking at it, and I'm
surprised I'm cited as a cohort on this because I had no idea of what you were talking about.
Well, you're blamed for everything.
I never heard of that drug before, so I
confused MABs with TNIBs. I didn't realize TNIBs are small molecules. Where does this TNIB come from? Do we know?
Are we telling me what a TNIB is first?
TINIB.
I think it's the T for tyrosine and the inhibitor.
I see.
Inhibitor.
Yeah, it's tyrosine inhibitor. That's right. Tyrosine kinase, TNIB. So that's very specific.
Okay.
Whereas MAB is much broader, obviously.
Well, they can be, but they don't have to be.
And
no, there's a whole like stem that they use for it. You know, it's hard.
MAB.
There's close to 2,000 drugs now, right? And the way we keep track, in a lot of them, is these little endings, and there are conventions about how you end them. So, you know, a MAB is a monoclonal antibody, and XI-MAB is a chimeric. A ZU MAB is a humanized.
Here we go.
Tinib is a tyrosine. So
okay.
we messed up, yes.
So Ruben, by the
possible.
way, Ruben is a
Yeah.
professor at UCSD in the School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. So
Right.
he would know, and I'm happy he's listening.
You bet.
And
We
should
depend
get-
upon the kindness of strangers for our corrections.
No, here's the issue. We'd love to have a pharmaceutical chemist every now and then,
Yeah.
but typically we only know a week before what paper
Yeah.
we're doing. And if it were a drug paper, we could get a pharmaceutical chemist to talk all about PK and so pharmacokinetics. And what's the other one? There's pharmacokinetics, and I say I'm an idiot.
Pharmacodynamics.
Dynamics, thank you. PK and PD. That's a big deal these days, PK and PD.
No, it's gotten so complicated, in all honesty, that when we were rounding on the inpatient HIV service at North Shore, we always had a clinical pharmacologist with us. Because it's gotten to the point where, okay, you can make the diagnosis, you know what to use, but then they're on 6 other medications.
Yeah.
How do they all mix? What do you actually use?
Yeah, a lot of
it's
drugs.
gotten to the point where it takes a team to do clinical medicine in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
We have one more from Ken who writes, "Hi Vincent, this week during my daily commute I was listening to TWiP 94. It was a very good episode. However, as I was listening I noticed an error with regards to the description of the mechanism of action of the drugs. In the filarial paper that you discussed, Gleevec, imatinib, and the other 2 drugs are small molecule inhibitors of tyrosine kinases rather than being monoclonals.
Wow.
I imagine you have caught this or other listeners wrote in, but in case not, I figured I would write in. Looking forward to more TWiCs in the future along with Nurbinag. They are a great way to stimulate my mind during my daily commute to and from MedImmune.
Oh, good.
MedImmune, one of the greatest makers of monoclonal antibodies.
There you go. And where are they located, Vincent?
Gaithersburg, Maryland.
Right.
And I know this because I went to visit and I did a podcast from there, and Ken was my host.
How lovely.
They make antibodies that treat human diseases. Yes.
They do.
We apologize profusely, right? I do. Do you apologize?
I
deepest
apologize.
My deepest
No, I
apologies.
remember afterwards I was asking Vincent. It's like I hate the fact that it's a live show. Can we go back and fix that? It's embarrassing. But no,
a week later is fine.
That's a problem with the live show.
Next one's from Anthony, who says, on TWiP 94, around 1 hour and 5 minutes, Professor Despommier mentions GERDs and other weird mammals as model organisms. What are GERDs and these other mammals? I made some attempts at a Google search, but got listings for acid reflux disease in dogs.
Yeah, you'd get that unless you spell the name correct. So GERDS, Jirds.
Jirds. Jirds. And now you will see the genus. Oh,
right.
beautiful.
Go to Google Images, you'll see a bunch of
there's
pictures.
plenty. Jirds.
GERDs, not
Do
GERDs.
you
GERDs.
apologize for misleading Anthony?
Nope, not even a little bit.
Why
Not
not?
even
Why
a
not?
small amount.
Why? You misled him.
I did not. He spelled it Gerds. That's not what I said.
Dickson, read the next one from
said
Steve.
Jerd.
I'm just kidding. Read the
Oh,
next
okay. Steve writes, "Hi, Vincent, Dickson, and Daniel. Good to have you back after the hiatus, and thanks for filling me in on the usefulness of the dreaded ticks. Dickson was wondering if it was possible to freeze fish quickly and cleanly, and the team seemed vague on how it was done. This reminded me of the superb but harrowing documentary on the soulless way we produce and treat our food, our daily bread. It is made all the more effective by having no narrator, just the machines and the human robots who mind them. The section beginning about 1 hour and 10 minutes into the show shows how farmed salmon is prepared. I think you will find it to be one of the most soulless parts of the whole piece. Everyone should see this film and wonder what it is to live in a world run by humans, only for humans. All the best, Steve Luton from England."
Luton, England, where? Read the whole thing, Dixon.
Where it is pleasantly cool and quiet tonight.
What is it like here now, Dixon?
It's quite pleasantly warm and daylight. It's about 82 degrees Fahrenheit with about 45 to 50% humidity. No wind out of the southwest.
42% humidity. Very good. Yeah. And it's 28 Celsius.
And what is the Fahrenheit temperature?
I
on
don't
that
do
one?
Fahrenheit, man.
You have to do Fahrenheit.
Sorry.
Because I just said it. I said 82 degrees.
I don't know. Do you have a Fahrenheit?
I do see also.
I got the
I
got the humidity.
Even my in my
spot
Apple
on.
Watch 29C. But I was gonna say, Anthony, I tried to look up GERD too, GERD. I didn't know it was spelled with the J. So.
JIRDS. GERD.
Because a lot of times I don't know what Dickson's talking about. I try to. If I had to admit that every time, I'd be always googling.
There are three of us. We can cover the waterfront. If one of us doesn't know, the other two does. So that's the way it works.
It's funny. I just Googled Despommier GERD, GERD, and there's a link for it. You spoke with Gerd Gigeresner about vertical farming once. Can you imagine?
Did I do that?
You did.
It was a guy's name?
It's on the
GERD
internet.
was his first name, yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Well, he wasn't used in these experiments, fortunately.
All right. Daniel, summarize, please, our case from TWiP 94.
It's got us puzzled.
Got a people puzzled.
That is great. I wanted to create more of a differential. I noticed people were just doing the sort of the one shot. It's this, and then that was the end of it. I'm going to keep this covered so Dickson can't cheat off my sheet.
It's like playing cards, and you look over at the next guy's hand. You just can't help but bet the right way.
All right, so I will remind everybody. We had a 33-year-old Chinese male living in Chinatown with several months of watery diarrhea.
Several months.
Did we say months or weeks? Months. And I think that's critical. He was HIV positive, as we learned. He had a high CD4 count of 685. His viral load was not detected, so his disease was, we say, controlled. He reported being very sexually active and making several trips and having a trip to Chile several months prior to the onset of symptoms. We have a few things in our show notes here. Came to the U.S. when he was young from China, right? He did grow up in the U.S. He had many sexual partners greater than 50. That's not per visit, but over a lifetime.
Right.
And that he was indiscriminate about whether it was with men or women. It was a history of drug use. He did have a prior history of syphilis, which was treated. Prior nose job. Lives with his family. And,
rhinoplasty, please. Nose job. That's so...
You want to call it rhinoplasty?
Come on, that's what it's called. Nose job.
I would like to know, Dickson, this man knows exactly how many sexual partners he's had. Would you be able to come up with a number? I don't want the number. I just want to know if you would be able to come up with one.
I would have to sit down and take off my shoes.
I just think it's funny that he knows how many partners he had. At that point...
It might be he keeps a
how
list.
Would you know? Yeah, that's possible. Anyway, I just found it weird.
Yeah, I would not be able to do that.
Oh, you had that many,
It's a dim memory of my youth.
dim memory.
I've been married a long time.
All right.
Well, we do have a lot of guesses.
No, we do.
We have a lot.
And a lot of them are one-word guesses.
Which was the exact opposite of what I was after, right?
The first guess came from your boss, Steve Goff.
Oh, really?
Or your colleague, I should say.
Well.
One word, Giardia.
No, Steve.
Robin said, sounds like Cryptosporidium.
It does to
Could
me
be
too.
hominis, but with the Chilean cattle beef industry, parvum is a consideration.
Go on.
And Jerry said cyclosporiosis. Is that the right way to say it? Cyclosporiosis? Or is it cyclosporiasis?
It's cyclospora, so cyclosporiasis would probably be more correct.
It's cyclosporiasis.
Yeah.
And it's Cyclospora cayetanensis.
Cayetanensis.
All right, Daniel, take Varoons, please.
Greetings, professors. First, I wish to point out an error in the episode. Oh, no.
I missed this one.
Skip that part? Okay.
Right.
He also picked up on the fact. And this is great,
And this guy's a plumber. He doesn't even do a science. No, I'm just kidding.
Varoon is a junior
But
researcher.
coming to the clinical case challenge, I would like to know if there are CD4, CD8 counts available, and if a current HIV viral load is available. I would like to order a stool examination for an iodine wet mount and an AFB stain stool examination. Considering HIV status, there is following plethora of possibilities, not sure which one to pick. And so he gives us a list: Cryptosporidium, Cyclospora, Cytoisospora belli, Microsporidia. I just have a curiosity. I wonder if Dickson would do a parasitology course hosted at Coursera. That would be a blast.
No, brother.
I love the way you people deliver excellent educational content every single time without fail. Thank you, Twix fan.
Nice.
Arun C., Junior Research Fellow, Department of Neuromicrobiology.
Oh, Bangalore.
In Bangalore.
I've been to Bangalore. It's
Daniel,
a nice city.
didn't we give HIV viral loads?
We did, actually. We said that the viral load was controlled, so it was below the level of detection, which in most labs is 40. And we had a CD4 count of 684.
Yep. Okay. Dickson, want to take the next one?
Sure. David writes, Dear Daniel, Dickson, and Vincent, thank you for another riveting parasitic podcast, which makes busy work at my lab seem but a breeze. It is truly a treasure listening to three brilliant, I'm embarrassed to read this, brilliant scientific minds wax poetic the wonders of the parasitic world. The symptoms that the patient featured in the case study of episode 94 seems to point to none other than isosporiasis caused by this is a new word for me because I used to call it isospora, but it's cystoisospora belli. This parasite is ubiquitous, but it is found in many tropical, subtropical areas of the world, including Chile. The patient shows the classic signs of isosporiasis, diarrhea plus headaches, and the smoking gun isosporiasis often occurs in immunocompromised individuals. Finalized my hypothesis. The weather in Boston is overcast with clouds, 20% chance of precipitation, 74% humidity. Best wishes, Dave.
Isoporiasis.
Isoporiasis. That's. I'm not kidding. They've changed the name on this organism. So
They did actually. So that's fair.
Okay. So I'm old school. So I used to call it isospora.
I still call it isospora, but it has been officially
you're
changed.
Semi-old school. You're still practicing old school.
Well, it's part of the names. It's now cystoisospora. Is that what you're
yes,
saying?
Yes, they added the cysto prefix portion.
Why they did that, we'll never know.
Cysto and meaning urinary tract, having something to do with the urinary tract?
I don't think cysto comes to that. I'm not sure though.
Cystitis?
Or maybe it makes a cyst. Who knows?
Oh, okay. Elise writes, Dear TWiP trifecta. Well, this time I was away, but not for so long, so please forgive me if this diagnosis shows up late. After days of murky heat and piles of rain, it is lovely here in lower Manhattan. 79 degrees F, 26 C, but thunderstorms are returning, so it will be moist again in no time. I'm going to attempt a diagnosis of the 33-year-old Chinatown resident who has been suffering from intermittent diarrhea for months. I suspect that he has a Giardia infection, giardiasis. It is possible, and as a dog owner, I know this very well, to become infected with Giardia in the Northeast, but the parasite is extremely common in Chile, where the patient has been recently. Often people infected with Giardia have no symptoms but watery diarrhea of the sort that the patient describes as one of the most common. The infection is spread through contaminated water and food, but it can also be spread through oral and anal sex. The patient describes a very varied sex life with many partners, so it is very possible that if he did not encounter the parasite in his food, and he does say he is an adventurous eater, one or more of his recent partners could have infected him. I do have some questions, though. My reading suggests that giardiasis is usually self-limiting, so for this case to linger in a relapsing fashion for months is a little unusual. However, I have found mentions of post-infectious irritable bowel syndrome, which would cause the symptoms to persist. Does his HIV status make him more prone to giardiasis, or do the medications he takes make him more vulnerable to gastric symptoms? Finally, I had found some descriptions of tapeworm, diphyllobothriasis infections that have some similarity to the patient's experience, but I am still inclined to think that Giardia is a more likely suspect. I am prepared to be wrong with this diagnosis. Thank you so much, as always, for your terrific work. Many best wishes. All right. We have one more, Dickson.
S.J. writes, Greetings from the Eastern Sierra. The entire state of California is on fire currently, and the small system that moved through yesterday did nothing to dampen that fact. Currently, it is 18 degrees C with a 22% chance of precipitation. Lots of smoke in the air. Sounds very pleasant. For the 33-year-old Chinese male, I have to say this was an interesting one. As was pointed out, there are many causes of recurring diarrhea. Thankfully, the viral, fungal, and bacterial options have been ruled out due to this being TWiP. Otherwise, we could look at traveler's diarrhea, given our patient's love of travel, as a possible diagnosis. I'm going to guess that it's cryptosporidiosis. The symptoms are relatively minor, which rules out more serious parasitic infections. Could be Giardia, which occasionally recurs, but the main reason I picked a cryptosporidium infection has to do with the patient being an HIV-infected male. For one, immunocompromised individuals have a difficult time fighting off cryptosporidiosis and often see symptoms return. For another, certain sexual practices can cause direct infection and do not require the patient to ingest infected food or water. Finally, according to Wikipedia, the ultimate source, cryptosporidium is the most common organism pardon me, isolated in HIV-infected patients presenting with diarrhea. The headache could simply be a coincidental symptom or perhaps is due to mild dehydration. Thanks, and I always look forward to the next episode, as always.
You like to insert extra words.
I do.
Drop
I
kind of edit
embellish.
as you go.
I do that. I actually do that. I think it makes it a more interesting, tolerable.
So let's summarize the guesses that we have had here. We had Giardia, cryptosporidium, cyclosporiasis, right? And microsporidia. Cystoisospora. Get near the microphone, please.
I was misquoted, so
and Giardia, right? So we've got, as I joked last time, there's lots of parasites that can cause diarrhea, at least 3.
They got them all.
At least 3, that's right. So Giardia, in my view, I would opt not for Giardia because of its association with foul-smelling stools and steatorrhea. This man eats a normal diet, I presume, when he's back in Chinatown, and he didn't suffer from any of that. He suffered from long-term watery stools. So Giardia is, from my point of view, not a likely candidate here. I do agree it could be chronic, and some people have maintained Giardia for years, so it's not unusual to find it as a chronic diarrheal/constipation/diarrheal/constipation cycle throughout a person's 3 or 4 years of experience with it. But in general, AIDS patients suffering from HIV, mild HIV in this case, would be able to maintain low levels of cryptosporidium for a long, long time, and that's a watery diarrhea. So I'm going to check off cryptosporidium in my box.
All right. So yes, as we said, there's a lot of parasites that can cause this, and it is nice. We're on TWiP, so we've removed the bacteria. There's a lot of bacterial causes, viral causes, but there is actually something about the history, the fact that it's been going on for months. Right?
If it were viral, it would probably be acute, right?
Yeah, but most of our viral, and I should say most of our bacterial, but not all, would be more acute.
What are the bacterial besides E. coli? What else?
So they're well, in addition to, let's say it was acute, right? Shigella, Campylobacter, Yersinia, Salmonella. There's a number. Now, there's a form of E. coli, an enteroadherent, which actually can have a more chronic course. But in general, most of our bacterial causes are going to be acute. Most of our viral are going to be acute. When you start seeing the months, it actually is more consistent with a parasitic cause. Dickson makes some good points, and I think this is always one of the first things I want to know when I get a call from an emergency room doc or something. Oh, we've got a patient with HIV. What's their viral load? What's their CD4 count? Because that really breaks down into whether or not they're an immunocompromised person. And by that, they may often have an elevated viral load, but more importantly, they're going to have a low CD4 count. And 200 is a very good threshold. 684, 685, that's pretty close to normal. Yeah. This person has a relatively preserved immune system. I say relatively because there are certain exceptions. Tuberculosis will rear its head at high CD4 count. Something's still wrong. But a lot of like the cytoisosporavillus, you're not going to see that. Certain things you're not going to see at a high CD4 count. You're going to see at a lower one.
So no one considered Entamoeba. This is not part of the picture.
Well, let's talk about why that should be in the differential and why we should or should not consider it. Okay, so we talked a little bit there. So what about Entamoeba? What's the classic amoebic dysentery? How is it usually described?
Dysentery.
Like we always say dysentery.
Dysentery is bloody,
right? Isn't that usually what they mean?
Okay,
that's right.
And so could this be?
Probably not. He doesn't have any blood in his stool.
Right, and so then there are some minor players which sometimes are accused of causing diarrhea, right? So one of them is Blastocystis hominis, which almost looks like a yeast when you stain the slides, but it really turns out to be a protozoan. It's an anaerobic protozoan. It can be cultured. We know little about it. It's persistent. It doesn't go away with drugs. You have your hand up.
Dickson, on TWiP a long
Always
time
ask the
ago.
question. Horshack, please.
A long time ago on TWiP, you described a case of someone here
I did.
who had a
I
long-term
did.
diarrhea.
It
Chronic,
was the daughter of the dean of the
and was
School
it
of Medicine.
blastocystis?
It was blastocystis would not go away, and she continued to have intermittent diarrhea.
And she never figured out. No one figured out what was the
Well,
problem.
if they
Yeah.
did and they said it was blastocystis, there's virtually nothing you can do for it because the drugs don't work. No drug works against it. So another one is Endolamax nana. Endolamax nana is a
Excellent.
frequent occurring contaminant in an otherwise diagnosable stool exam. For example, you sometimes find Endolamax nana, which is an amoeba, by the way, with Entamoeba histolytica, or with Entamoeba coli, which is another non-pathogenic amoeba. So when you see Endolimax nana, or Iotamoeba buchlei,
Oh, wow.
or come on, I used to teach this. Come on, give me a break.
There's
here.
a whole chapter.
You
He's reading the.
You can do better with viruses than I can
No,
with parasites.
It's just that they've never come up on TWiP, Dickson.
Well, they haven't come up on TWiP because we've never really had to deeply explore the differential diagnosis in a reasonably immunocompetent person, but still with borderline immunocompetency as a side note. All right? So it's possible that any of these organisms could be causing this problem.
Remember, just because he has a high CD4 count doesn't mean there are not other immune defects.
That's true. That's
Right.
true.
Yeah.
Because HIV has multiple effects on the immune system,
Yeah,
one
that's
of
right.
which is depletion of CD4s, but many other immune cells are affected, and we
Yeah.
don't know if they're all dependent on CD4.
So in New York
depletion,
City,
right?
there was an outbreak of diarrheal disease in patients suffering from HIV/AIDS, in which they were experiencing 10 liters of watery diarrhea per day. That exceeds any cholera
I
production
was
you
just
could
gonna ask.
possibly
Yeah,
imagine.
it does, huh?
So, and those people died eventually because there was nothing to do for them. The triple therapy didn't exist in those days. So these were the test cases, and they all turned out to have cryptosporidium. It turns out that cryptosporidium oocysts were present in the drinking water supply of New York City because New York City does not filter its water. So you can imagine the panic that set in in the gay communities where I don't know if I have HIV or not, but I'm going to find out by drinking tap water. Imagine. And we described an epidemic in Milwaukee
Yeah, right.
that actually did identify 200 HIV/AIDS patients. They weren't patients. They were just normal citizens that were heading towards that diagnosis, and they all died. So if this were cryptosporidium in a truly immunocompromised HIV patient, he would have been dead by now. So given his immune status, I can see this as a lingering, non-life-threatening, long-term watery diarrhea.
All
Okay.
right.
Does that sound official enough to you?
No, I think that was really good. And I remember when that happened. And the cryptosporidium, we still don't filter the water in New York City. So I remember it was a scare and all these issues. Well, what if I take a shower? Do I have to put some kind of a filter on the shower head? It was a big deal. But yeah, so I think our differential, I say, is, Giardia should be included. And I think so far there's an issue about why this seems less likely. Amoebic infection should be considered. The sporidium should be initially considered. And with those in mind, and I think I want to find right here, who was the letter? It was from Varun. He actually suggests, well, what are we going to do next? We want to somehow sort this out. We've got our history, and our history is leaning us certain ways. Let's go ahead and do some diagnostic testing, right?
Oh, good.
And I'm gonna give Dickson a couple things because I think when he hears these, so a couple really quick things you can do, like right then when the person is being seen. This is stuff you have to send off. We brought up this issue of dysentery, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things you can do is you can actually test the stool. You can do what's called a Guyak test.
I was just going to say.
And you could say, is it Guyak positive?
Right.
Is there blood? The person isn't reporting blood, but is it heme positive?
Right.
And so we do that, and it's heme positive.
Really?
Okay, so it's heme positive.
He's got
But he's not
cancer of the
reporting.
bowel.
But he's not reporting blood. Okay.
No blood.
Now the next test is great too. Then you can actually. Someone has to look at this. You can look at the stools for leukocytes. You do a stool leukocyte or a stool white. And in a lot of ways, we do this when we're trying to decide, is this an invasive bacterial disease? Because we deal a lot more with bacteria and viruses than we do parasites. Yeah. And it comes back, no white cells. So you're not seeing white cells, but you're seeing
blood?
but you're seeing heme. And this actually is quite a hint.
Bloodless heme.
So there's heme. There's heme being released, but we're not seeing white cells. Where are the white cells? And usually they go together. If you had a Shigella or Campyllo or one of these, say, invasive bacteria, you would see white cells, inflammatory cells. Person might report mucus in the stool.
We didn't say C. difficile yet either, but
we actually didn't consider that, and I think that's a good one to have in the differential. Particularly now we're talking about there's heme being released here.
Exactly. So where's that coming from?
Okay. So I'll give a little bit more, and that's why I wanted to bring up Bruns here. He actually says that we should go ahead and we should do an AFB stained stool examination. An acid fast stain, and I think that's good because
cold or hot. It's different for each organism that you're looking for here.
And this is, I think, key when we're sort of thinking about, I'll say, the sporidium in the HIV population, is that you may miss certain things if you just do normal stool studies. So this person has, as we mentioned, they have a heme test, which is positive, a stool leukocyte test, which is negative. They have stool ovum parasites sent off. They have bacterial cultures, which are sent. And we'll jump forward in time and tell you the bacterial cultures were negative.
Oh, good.
Otherwise, they wouldn't make it on TWiP.
Right.
The acid-fast stains are done.
By the way, it could have been two infections causing the same thing, right?
That's true.
So we could have two.
And what about Giardia? Now, it used to be that Giardia was just in the realm of O&P. Nowadays, we do an antigen test, and the antigen test is very sensitive. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to tell you the antigen test is negative.
Exactly.
So no Giardia.
Nope.
The acid-fast, we're not seeing any of the sporidium. But we have a stool leukocyte test that's negative and a heme test that's positive. And something is seen on the stool O&P.
Well, you said acid-fast test was negative.
Was negative. So they didn't see when they looked at the acid-fast data.
Okay, but go ahead. This is a watery diarrhea.
It was a watery diarrhea.
Watery, that's a hint.
So there's not a lot of...
Exactly. So you might have stoked
Was it round or elongated?
What was seen in the stool?
Yeah.
So it was... Can I use the proper term? Because it wasn't elongated. It was not a worm.
It was not a worm.
It was roundish.
Roundish.
It was round. We use the term
roundish,
amoeboid, right?
Amoeboid.
Can we say amoeboid?
Interesting.
So I'll actually tell you now. As everyone's ready, they've had enough time, hopefully, to Google. Pause now if you want to Google the whole heme leukocyte thing. This is our audience, not Dickson. He doesn't need to Google. And they saw these forms in the stool that had within them red cells.
Were they motile?
They didn't. I didn't physically see them. Right, this is the report. So I don't know.
And they're large, obviously large because
they're large
red
enough
cells.
that they could actually have red cells inside of them.
That's probably, I'm going to say, that's pathognomonic for a certain organism.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that because I was looking at one of the chapters in the Parasitic Diseases book, which needs revision, and but further, so. In the olden days, right? I don't know how far back the olden days were, but at one point we would have said, that's it, that's the diagnosis. And it probably is pretty reasonable. We used to say if there are ingested erythrocytes in these amoeboid forms, we not only know it's an amoeba, but we also know which amoeba it is.
That's correct.
Since then, they've actually realized that, though not all the time, 1% of the time some of the other, we say, non-pathogenic amoebas can ingest erythrocytes. So we have to revise that in the next edition of Parasitic Diseases.
And you'll name those organisms now, I hope, because I'm totally unfamiliar with that data.
Okay. Actually, I brought that up for... So we think that this is E. histolytica.
Bingo.
Okay?
Which
and people used to say that... So this was confusing for a long time. So this person has... And they go on not just to look at this, but we actually do an antigen test. And so it's confirmed that this is antigen positive. It's Entamoeba histolytica. We used to say, and by we, I my first textbook of parasitic diseases, that if you saw ingested erythrocytes that was pathognomonic, you knew that it was Entamoeba histolytica. We now know that Entamoeba dispar, and this one's a mouthful, Mashkovsky, the non-pathogenic, they actually can ingest erythrocytes as well. In the right clinical situation, is that really clinically significant? We're going to do an antigen test probably anyway.
Right, sure.
But yeah, that's one of the just sort of, modern nuances.
So you have okay, keep talking. I don't want to spoil the story because I know what Amoebic Dysentery is considered a non-pathogenic mimic, a morphologic mimic for E. histolytica. Mm-hmm. It's identical in terms of morphology. I didn't realize, of course, that Dysentery could ingest red cells. I didn't know that because in order to ingest red cells, it means you have to be intimately associated with the tissues, unless there's some GI bleeding. And there was some heme released into the...
But no cells.
But maybe no red cells because they were being disintegrated as they were releasing their hemoglobin. Maybe that was what was going on.
Well, that's the other exciting part. And, I grab cases because they have cool aspects. One of them is that often with a Amoebic histolytica diagnosis, you don't see the white cells because the Amoebic histolytica is either destroying or eating them.
That's true.
So it's an odd relationship.
But you do see something.
And what do you see?
Well, there are little crystals, all right, little elongated diamond-shaped crystals.
Yes.
And these diamond-shaped crystals were named by two physicians, as I recall, Charcot and Leiden. Mm-hmm. Those two people actually identified them as pathognomonic for disintegrated eosinophils. It's what's left after the eosinophil breaks apart, releases their granular contents, and some of those contents actually are so pure in concentration that they crystallize and then are found in the stool associated with Amoebic histolytica and Strongyloides stercoralis. Those two parasitic infections are often accompanied by the sort of the footprints that eosinophils were here. Okay, so far so good?
Yeah, and actually that's great, which is interesting. I've always wondered about because you don't really get eosinophilia with an amoebic dysentery, right? Because they're very localized.
Not with a dysentery, but you do with one particular really weird developmental consequence of chronic E. histolytic infection. So you're probably going to talk about that.
No, I'm going to let you actually tell us.
Well, it's called an Amiboma. Mm-hmm. And an Amiboma is a sort of an attenuated attempt on the part of the amoeba to build itself a flask-shaped ulcer. And in doing so, because the host fights back, and in particular with neutrophils first, and then a variety of other monocytic cells. And then finally, the last frontier of defense are the eosinophils, which come in and sort of trying to clean up all the debris. And in doing so, they're the last survivors. And then they die. And when they die at this site, this Amiboma, they release their granules, they crystallize, and then you get the Charcot-Leiden crystals coming out. So you could end up with a bowel obstruction as the result of an Amiboma, which would, of course, be a confounding factor here because he's got watery diarrhea. He doesn't mention any formed stools at all. I don't recall that having been asked.
No, he didn't. He said watery.
Never had a formed stool in months? Wouldn't you think something's wrong at that point?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have gone to a doctor a long time before that one, I think. But,
different.
We don't know. We don't know.
Yeah, no, the Amiboma is actually quite a problem. I had a patient, and I'm thinking of which patients I'm going to tell everybody about, present. I had a patient that was out in Colorado, and this was an older gentleman, not that old. I think he was 59, 60 or so. And he was in that realm of colon cancer screening, and he went to be screened, and they wanted to do the colonoscopy, but they had trouble. A lot of you just wouldn't tolerate it, so they sent him instead for a barium enema. And when they did the barium enema, they saw what they describe as an apple core lesion. And it really, if you take an apple and you chew around and you picture that apple almost like an hourglass shape to it, and that was what they were seeing. And prompted them to go to surgery and remove this apple core lesion, being very concerned. Here we are in Colorado that this man has cancer. And I was alerted later that day when they realized that it was not a cancer that they had sent this individual in for. And it was an Amiboma. And the person had traveled quite a bit previously. And that's what it was. So it can get you into trouble itself. It can also get you into trouble because it looks for all the world like a big cancer.
Indeed.
So where would he have gotten this amoeba?
So this gentleman, as some of our people brought up, he had a lot of behaviors that probably put him at risk for this. You acquire the amoeba through sort of a fecal oral route, as we say. So somehow he got feces into his mouth.
So either
feces
food or sex.
Yes, exactly.
Or water. You could have water.
Water too.
Yeah, it could be water. Just has to somehow get into the mouth.
Okay.
That's right.
And certain parts of the world may have higher incidences of these than others.
Yeah.
They say
But
Brazil is more safe than Chile, maybe, than Argentina.
Oral anal sex is a real possibility. Right?
Yeah, that's
But
also
what
possible.
about, do we have this in the U.S., Dickson?
We do. It's rare. I mean, you just heard about one
Very
from Colorado.
rare,
So
yeah.
the answer is it's rare no matter what happens.
Okay.
Because it either fulminates into a diarrhea and then into a dysentery, or it disappears entirely from the bowel and gets into the bloodstream and goes to the liver and forms a big cyst, and then you get amoebic abscess, and then that's a real problem. I mean, this is a problem,
Right.
obviously, but that's
So no one picked this up because no blood in stool, right?
Actually, it was picked up pretty quick once he decided to go for medical attention.
Of our listeners.
I
no
think
one suggested it.
that's what it was.
Yeah.
I think if I had said, "Here's a gentleman who traveled overseas and now he has dysentery," he's describing blood.
I would have changed my
And actually,
diagnosis
I
too,
think
right?
that's important. Is about half of the cases the patient does not describe blood in the stool, but 99% are going to be heme positive. So the history won't always give you the fact that there's blood.
So based on the Guyak, would you call this dysentery then?
That's a tough call. Well, you have to go to the video replay for that one.
Well, no, I mean, we still, the terminology is amoebic dysentery. Would we call it amoebic colitis? No, I would call it amoebic colitis. I probably wouldn't.
A lot of times you'll find frank blood in the stool
Yeah.
from this disease.
Yeah, and I would say amoebic colitis. And amoebic colitis is probably a better term because it covers the fact that there's a breath here. Is that it's not the majority that have described blood in the stool.
I think it's rare for somebody with this condition, though, to go so long without seeking medical assistance.
It caused no discomfort, although...
Well, weight loss, he must have had some weight loss.
Yeah, he did have some weight loss. But I think a lot of you got to realize here's a gentleman who's engaged in behavior that maybe isn't acceptable in his cultural context. He's leaving New York and traveling to engage in the things he wants to engage in. So he's having this problem. He probably really doesn't want to go talk to someone about this. So, months go by and then he...
When did he get diagnosed for his HIV?
I believe it was several years prior.
So he knows that he's at risk.
You may not.
Oh, I think all the AIDS patients know they're at risk. They have a long list of symptoms and
Maybe.
Opportunistic infections.
What did you do for him?
Yeah, right. What happened next?
Oh, so this gentleman, as far as treatment goes, he actually went ahead. We have some choices, and he was treated with Flagyl. So you could have said, oh, I think he's got Giardia and treated him.
Trade users.
I like Flagyl, right? Because it's targeting flagellated.
Yeah, but this
things.
is not a flagellated organism.
It's not. Which is why, as I was saying, you could have used the same thing for Giardia, but then it gets a little bit different. Okay, so your metronidazole, he's got to take this for about a week. Now, the metronidazole is going to get into the tissue and it's going to treat any of the invasive forms.
Right.
But if there are any cysts left in the lumen, you're not going to treat those. And he could actually go ahead and actually spread it to someone else in New
There is
York
that
City.
window of time.
So you actually...
But he's got a diarrheal disease. It's probable that the gut transit time is very fast, and I might take exception to what you just said.
So we usually use a second agent. It's called a luminal agent to try to clear out, basically to make him not
Will that
infectious.
get rid of the cysts as well?
Yes.
What tissues
And so
would
that's
the amoeba-
paromomycin
What?
that we'll use.
Sorry, say that again.
Paromomycin, yeah.
Yep.
Paromomycin. Or
Paramomycin.
Paromomycin.
All right.
You could have used iodoquinol too, no?
We could.
Okay.
What tissues would the amoeba be in? Besides,
Now, that's interesting. If somebody is immunocompetent, that's going to restrict the number of tissues. What we think happens is they're in the intestines. They actually like to be down in the colon. They then invade through the wall, and we think usually enter through the portal circulation where they can end up in the liver. And usually they'll end up in the liver. They can often spread from the liver, but usually not till after they start to form a cyst. But immunocompromised people, they can actually get all over the place. They've even been in the brain. And
And this gentleman had no evidence of other tissue involvement, right?
No.
Thank goodness. Well, he was, again, borderline immunocompetent. That probably saved him.
Yeah. I mean, immunocompetent people can still get amoebic abscesses / cysts in the liver.
You didn't mention whether he was on triple therapy, or you did. Did I miss it?
Yes, he was on triple therapy.
Okay. So, all right. Yeah, this is an unusual occurrence then.
So, and it is actually the amoebic colitis is higher incidence in the HIV population, even outside of the low CD4 count. And it probably, as was mentioned by different folks, it probably may relate to different practices and exposure to the amoeba.
Very good. Excellent.
Yeah, but it's interesting. I mean, this person has amoebic colitis. As we mentioned, there's a lot of other forms of amoebiasis. It's less common, right? Colitis is the most common. The abscesses, right, with the anchovy paste, which everyone likes to discuss.
That's true.
Yeah.
And no one got it, Dickson. No one got it.
So it might be worth mentioning, too, that metronidazole is a drug which kills off anaerobes. So it's also effective against bacterial abscesses, particularly brain abscesses caused by bacteria, even though it's primarily used to fight off Giardia, which is a strict anaerobe, and Amoebic histolytica, which is a strict anaerobe. The one thing you won't find in the cytoplasm of Amoebic histolytica, which you would find, I'm sure, in all of the other E. histolytica lookalikes, are bacteria. E. histolytica does not ingest bacteria, ever.
Got it, Dickson.
So, because I was in the diagnostic lab for a while, and those were the criteria that we used, because we had no antibody test, we had no PCR, we didn't even know what PCR meant. We didn't even know that DNA was no, we knew that, but I mean, it was in the old days where you had to use visual. And I was just going to say, if it had been Entamoeba dispar rather than Entamoeba histolytica, and you treated him with metronidazole, it doesn't go away. Dispar sticks around. It's not susceptible to that drug. So those in the old days, because we only had morphology to go on, we would say drug failure. But in essence, it wasn't a drug failure at all. They weren't suffering from amoebiasis. Their diarrhea was caused by something else. But dispar stayed around. So we said, we're giving them the right drug, and they're still infected. So
Today, what would you use to treat them?
What, the dispar?
Dispar, yeah.
I don't think there is a drug against dispar.
A glass of warm water.
A glass of warm water, yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, they're not invasive. They don't invade the tissues. They're getting red cells that probably come out of the bleeding ulcers that are created by something else, like, maybe salmonellosis or something like that.
Why do you say a glass of warm water?
So we don't think of dispar as being a pathogen.
All right.
So if you were to, and this is a problem. You asked before, like, do we have Amoebic histolytica in the United States? They did a lot of these surveys of the incidence of amoebiasis throughout the world before they knew there were all these, other types. And that made it very confusing for a while. And so I don't know if people have ever really gone back quite as well and said, okay, now that we know, let's do all these amoebic studies in different areas and make sure it's histolytica that we're...
So we're giving credit to a technician in England. His name was Sargent. And this gentleman was so persistent and so convinced that he was looking at two different species that he pursued this down to the enzymatic level. And he could prove to you that the Amoebic histolytica has all these enzymes necessary for tissue invasion, and dispar does not. But you can't do an enzymatic test on every amoeba that you see under the microscope, right? So eventually they came up with monoclonal antibodies, I believe, for one way of distinguishing them. Are you
sure it was monoclonal, Dickson?
Sorry? No, but maybe it's a nib or a snib.
Okay. Dickson,
it was fun. It was fun.
That's great. Let's do a paper.
You bet.
You picked it, Dickson.
I did, and I picked it based on the fact that I also subscribe to Chemical and Engineering News, and I read this over breakfast, and I'm fascinated by all the associations of chemistry with the real life of the things that we know about. And here was this big headline, and the headline says, Leishmania drug resistance may be caused by overexposure to arsenic in drinking water. I was fascinated. And there's a PLOS paper on this, which is a PLOS neglected.
PLOS NTS. PLOS NTS.
Yeah.
Neglected tropical diseases.
Correct. Which was,
Arsenic
by the way,
exposure.
established by Peter Hotez, by the way, I must say.
Arsenic exposure and outcomes of antimonial treatment in visceral leishmaniasis.
Right.
Leishmaniasis patients in Bihar, India. Is it
Correct.
Bihar?
Yeah.
Now, there are a number of authors from Dundee, the UK, India,
Exact.
Barcelona. I know Alan Fairlamb. I know him.
Do you? Alan, I know Alan.
Because Doris, my wife.
Sure. He's a good protozoologist.
Yeah. Okay, Dickson. What do they do here?
Well, this is all meta-analysis, so this is all retrospective study. So
They did a study
they did a study. They did a big study. It involved hundreds of patients
in India.
in this district. And interestingly enough, because arsenic in the drinking water in that region of the world is a big problem. Okay, so in Bangladesh,
Where does it come from?
it comes from the Himalayan mountains.
Now, why would arsenic make you drug resistant? Tell us the chemistry.
Well, apparently on the periodic table, arsenic and tin, which is the metal that's used in sodium stibogluconate.
That's the drug they use to
That
treat.
is the one. So SSG. That's the drug. The trivalent and divalent antimony and trivalent and divalent tin share a lot of chemistry together.
You sure we don't need to get a pharmacological chemist here?
Yeah, well, maybe. In my readings, I've discovered, and one of the references here was the one I read, says that in vitro, you can culture these organisms in the promastigote states, and you can select for resistance to sodium stibogluconate by exposing them to low and then higher and higher and higher amounts of arsenic. And the reason why they're concerned here is because they've dug a lot of low well watering places for people. All right, so it's a pump. It's only 50 feet down into the ground, and out comes this wonderful water from the aquifers from the Himalayan mountains, and it's laced with arsenic. Okay, I didn't mean that arsenic and Olays.
Yeah, right.
All right, so, but there it comes down in a series of fingers. Okay, so if you look at geological formations and you look at these fingers or rivers of underground arsenic and you place your well in between one of the fingers, you don't get any arsenic in your drinking water. If you hit one of the fingers, you're way over the legal limits in terms of the EPA or any WHO recommendations. So these people are crap shooting with their futures by placing these wells randomly. You hit the water no matter where you go.
The arsenic has its own issues, right?
It has its own issues. Oh, yeah, it's an immunosuppressive agent.
And so the idea here would be that it's hitting the same target as the antimony anti-Leishmania compound.
That's their premise.
And selecting for resistance,
That
right?
was their premise. They said, we know it happens in vitro. Is it happening in vivo?
By the way, Dickson,
Yes.
how do you get Leishmania?
That's a great question, which I'm going to turn over to our parasitic expert. No, you get it by the bite of a phlebotomous fly.
Phlebotomist.
A sand fly.
And these are people with visceral Leishmaniasis.
Yeah, or also known as Cala azar.
It's not on it's not on your face. It's inside. Right?
Starts out on your face, disappears, reappears in all of your...
This is cutaneous when it's on
that's
your
right.
face.
They call it
right?
reticuloendothelial system. Remember that old term?
Yeah. It's an old term? Is that
It
right?
is an old term.
You don't use it anymore?
I don't think so.
No, we do. We still use it. Yeah. It's okay. It's still around.
So all of those phagocytic cells that are fixed both in the liver and in the spleen, and the wandering ones also, they all become infected with leishmaniasis.
So how did they test this hypothesis?
Well, they went back over medical records, and they issued questionnaires that were distributed by healthcare workers in the area. And they were looking for high death rates over very, very small geographical regions.
Just death? Nothing else?
Death, because this organism is about 80% lethal if you don't treat it.
How do they know it was Leishmania-induced death?
That's a very good question, too. And again, they depend on the death certificates.
Really?
They do. And A lot of times they
Why
weren't
didn't they
present.
just take blood, Dickson?
Well, because these people are dead.
I know, just kidding.
Yeah, and they don't have medical facilities in a lot of these backcountry places. So they depend on their diagnosis for epidemiological reasons. They say lots of Calais-Azar over there. They died. It must have been from Calais-Azar. It could have been a malaria outbreak, or it could have been a toxicity event from a factory that released chemicals like they did in Bhopal.
This sounds a little dicey.
It sounds not exactly precise medicine. That's
Right.
exactly correct. But I picked it because, and
I'm
the
not
more I read it, the more I
criticizing you.
realized, with very little epidemiological evidence, they were able to show an association.
How did they do that?
They did it by complicated biostatistics, which I'm not fully familiar with.
But
So,
wait, you've got these people who died supposedly of Leishmania.
yeah, but only in certain small
We know where
regions.
they lived, and what else? What is the other part?
And the other thing, of
equation?
course, is the high amount of arsenic in the water.
They actually went and measured it.
Oh yeah, that's an easy deal.
Yeah,
That's
part of the study. They actually took water.
They did. They did.
measured
of
it
course.
for arsenic.
Of course. So every one of the wells
Okay.
in this district was classified as a low, an intermediate, or a very high level of arsenic in the water.
So
And
let me just add another thing, Dickson. Here,
Please.
they actually visited patients' homes who had
They did.
histories
They
of
did.
not just deaths. Right? They had histories.
yeah,
of
some of them
leishmaniasis.
recovered, but in the areas where the arsenic was the highest, the death rate was, I think, 59% or something like this among the patients diagnosed with Calais-Azar.
Right, but I just want to make clear that it's not just people who died of VL; it's people who had it, because some
Right.
of these people were still alive.
Oh,
right?
sure. Okay. They didn't all die. That's very true.
So then you have these data on who died and who were still living with VL, and then where
That's
the
right.
arsenic levels are.
Yeah, that's
And
correct.
They say that there is a slight association of elevated arsenic with VL, but it's not statistically.
I know. I was put off by that
significant.
statement. They had to be honest about it because they did the analysis, they did the epidemiology, they did the chemistry, and they wanted to say that there was an association between the high levels of arsenic in the water and the elevated death rates from.
Which doesn't mean it's not real, right?
No, the point is that
We can't let statistics run us, can we?
if leishmaniasis is not treated, it's 80% fatal. If it's treated, it usually goes away. In this case, 59% of the treated patients died. That's a red herring. All right, you know that something's up at that point. I meant to say red flag.
So
not
death
a red herring.
is associated.
Death with injecting sodium stipogluconate for treatment. And we knew there was
So
Calais-Azar.
arsenic and death were correlated.
Exactly right.
That was statistically significant in this
That
study.
is exactly
So they
right.
don't know why.
No, they don't. But now this will serve as
It
the
could
basis.
be that the arsenic made them more liable to die, right?
Well, it's funny because arsenic is cardioprotective, isn't it? And so there was this famous play, I think, Arsenic and Old Lace, where they were actually giving little smidgens of arsenic to these old people, and they were living longer than they should because arsenic is actually good for your heart in some
Remind me,
ways.
was this what killed Napoleon?
Oh,
Or was
that's a
that
good
cyanide?
question. What killed Napoleon?
Didn't they poison him with arsenic? Let's look right now so that no one corrects us.
No, and if I was Bennett Cerf, I would have said, no, that's not what killed Napoleon because it was
Yeah.
killed by an explosive event. And you know what happened?
Well, it was a theory that he had died with arsenic poisoning. Yes.
You know what happened?
But
Napoleon blown apart.
oh, Dickson, you're so
That's
corny.
terrible.
No, that's Bennett
That's
Cerf.
terrible.
That's a real line from a Bennett Cerf.
Actually, they had hair samples of his in 2008. They didn't find any
No
arsenic in it.
no
Yeah.
arsenic.
No, these are sort of the challenging. I mean, I love the topic, but unfortunately, what they find at the end is we really can't show this is. What they do show is arsenic is not great for you, and they do say that
Arsenic is associated with death.
and it's associated with death. And what's tough is they say,
So
but
why did-
the people are dying like way after they're diagnosed and treated with the
Why
visceral
did they publish this
leishmaniasis.
article? Why did this journal publish this article?
Well, you don't need to have, and I think that's one of the advantages of the PLOS journals, is you don't necessarily need to have positive findings. You can publish negative studies.
Is this a negative study?
It's a negative study for their
I don't
hypothesis.
think it's. I'm not sure because.
Yeah, me neither.
Because I don't think arsenic exposure Well, so let's look at the title: Arsenic Exposure and Outcomes of Antimonial Treatment in Visceral Leishmaniasis Patients in Bihar, India. But it doesn't actually. There's no
conclusion in the title. It's neutral.
Yeah, there really isn't. It's just we're going to describe this, and we're going to say, you know what? There's really no association between.
They say they don't have enough numbers here to make solid conclusions, right?
Yeah.
But read this.
The
results.
limitations of the study may have masked a strong association between arsenic's exposure and resistance in the field.
But I'm struck by their first statement in the results. 110 VL patients treated with SSG were analyzed. The failure rate with SSG was 59%. You know what that should number of be? 1%,
Yeah,
2%.
it's too high, that's for sure.
So
We
what
don't
is
know
the
why,
cause?
though.
Now they were intrigued. Okay, why did that fail?
No, that we don't have an answer.
Well, they thought it was because of the high levels
Right,
of arsenic.
but they didn't prove that.
It went on to the next sentence says patients with high mean local arsenic level had a non-statistically significant higher risk of treatment failures. How can you say that it had a non-statistically significant higher risk?
Because there were there's a
because
higher
there was
risk.
a trend.
You
there was
can
a
see
trend.
it, right? But if you apply statistical procedures,
Exactly right.
No.
So this is the hint that you may be right, but classical statistics will not let you say that you were
Dickson,
right.
what could you do to address this?
Well, you go back into those regions now, and you keep much better care of the medical records.
Well, look, what's a retrospective study?
It means that this data was collected from medical records, basically.
It's looking at the past.
Yeah.
So how could we do this today?
A
and not prospective. Is there any way to do that?
Of course there is. They go into that in the last part of the paper.
I'm going to say there's sort of a challenge because, as they point out, in a lot of ways, you're dealing with a topic that is one of history. We no longer use the sodium stibogluconate in these regions. So if people are becoming, or there's some mechanism behind what made them resistant, we don't use that anymore. So it's a medicine that's no longer sort of on the shelf there ready for treatment.
Every now and then they take it. They did say that every now and then they take that medicine right back out again. I know. I'm just.
You
relaxing.
can't sit
You
back.
told me to relax.
Yeah, he relaxed and left the microphone.
What do you use
What
to
is the
treat-
drug of choice now?
So in this area, there's two drugs: miltefosine, which is oral; it's not a monoclonal antibody, and amphotericin. And there's two formulations for
That's a rough one.
amphotericin. And I think this is important. People hear amphotericin and they think of, amphoterrible. I remember that. I'm from the United States. It's in the IV and it causes all these things. They're talking about a single dose of liposomal.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
So this is not your
interesting.
crazy put in an IV, get 3 weeks. The traditional amphotericin is an IV formulation given over 3 weeks.
Highly toxic.
But there's a liposomal. There's actually 3 liposomal forms. And they're looking at doing it as a single dose, either with or without a second medication added to it.
Interesting.
So in a sense, what's happened is, okay, it's great that we're trying to understand how everything became resistant to these drugs, but clinically, we don't use them anymore.
Yeah.
So I should point out that they note that in vitro, if you expose promastigotes to arsenic,
That's right.
it makes them resistant to.
Right.
So it makes sense.
That's what got them started to begin with.
Hard to prove, and I'm not sure, based on what Daniel has said, if it's worth proving at this point, right?
Maybe not in that
We don't
region of
use it.
India.
We
but
don't use it.
If you go to Bangladesh, they may still be using it.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, well, it may be an issue in other parts of the world with other forms of leishmaniasis, right? So we've got our variant forms of leishmaniasis. We've got our visceral, right?
We do.
Called Old World visceral, where we have this resistance problem and they're switching.
Yes.
But in a lot of other parts of the world, the cutaneous and the mucocutaneous are still huge problems, and still in most of those areas, South America, for instance, sodium stibogluconate is
the drug of choice.
It's the drug of choice. That's what they're using. So if there's potentially a problem in those areas to lose that drug, the miltefosine and the amphotericin drugs, they're not cheap.
No.
They're the opposite of not cheap. They're really pricey.
Yeah.
So it could be a problem. So maybe there is a reason if you look in that context.
So Daniel, if you were treating a patient with leishmaniasis, and for some reason you used this antimony-based drug, and the patient wasn't responding, would you look at arsenic levels in that patient?
No, I wouldn't.
You would not.
Well, again, this is a study
would be
looking at a large
Kind of a bellwether for
yeah.
it. Right?
Yeah.
I'm just curious that it would be an indicator of, and in which case you would say, we got to find out why you've got high arsenic levels and let's fix it.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't
that
do
would be a second problem, right? You'd not be happy if they had high arsenic levels.
Well, Dickson, I understand that this is weak, but it's a very interesting idea. And it's not new, I understand that.
Well,
but
it attracted my attention from...
kind of shows the limitations of a retrospective study, right?
Of course.
So the thing to do now would be to take two groups of people, 50 individuals in each, half give water with arsenic, half not, infect them all with Leishmania,
Sure.
and then treat them both.
Right.
Oh, we can't do that.
No, we can't.
No, but what we could do is then we could isolate the organisms after the fact and culture them and check the genetics of resistance.
That would be a gain of function. All right. Anything else, Dickson?
No, no, not really, because no.
Okay.
I wish we could go into details of the biostatistics that was used to show that it was not significant, but that's a subject that's off of my pay scale. I was never good at that subject to begin with.
It's worth looking at because they note many in the discussion. They have many caveats that this is the problem here. So it's quite interesting. And this is open access, so everyone can look at it.
Right.
Stay away from arsenic.
If you can.
And Arsenio Hall.
Well, guess what? Rice from China and from Vietnam is exported, and it shows up on our shelves, and it's laced with arsenic.
Oh, yeah?
It's got lots of arsenic in it. And when you boil it and you make rice dishes, that stays there.
Have you been to Whole Foods?
Sure.
They have a section, they have a wall of rice.
Yeah, I know.
With little containers of rice from different places. You can take your plastic bag and put a little bit in. You're telling me that has arsenic
Wouldn't
in
it be interesting to take a sample from each one of those and come back with a mass spectrometer and find out which ones have the highest arsenic content?
Yeah, we bought some Japanese rice because it's very, very
Japanese
nice.
is probably okay.
It's extremely expensive.
Italian rice is probably okay.
Yeah.
Texas rice, North Carolina rice. But if you go to Vietnam, you go to China.
How about Thailand?
Thailand, sure. See, all of those drain from the Himalayan regions. So that's all arsenic-laden material.
Okay.
Apparently, basmati, I'm looking this up, basmati rice from California has very low arsenic levels, and quinoa is another low arsenic grain.
Indian
I shouldn't mention that
rice
rices from Texas are among the highest in arsenic
contents. Are you looking at
Are they
consumer
really?
Reports?
I'm looking at consumer reports.
Yeah. The Texas rice has a lot of arsenic?
I didn't want to. You're saying that. I didn't say that. No, maybe I did.
How much arsenic in your rice?
And apparently brown rice tend to have more arsenic than white rice, so I'm going to have to let my wife know because I much prefer white rice.
I do too.
So I'm worried about the arsenic. I'm going to have to switch.
Yeah, that's why it's brown. It's got all that arsenic.
I want California basmati.
So I want to correct something that I said before earlier. Did I mistake antimony for lead? For tin, rather?
Yeah, you did. You said on the
I really didn't mean. Yeah. I didn't mean that. I meant antimony, not tin. So sodium stipogluconate.
Don't worry, our writers will correct you.
No, but I don't want them to write in. You're wasting your email on that one. Because that had clicked in my head. That's not the right
Dickson
metal.
Didn't mean tin.
He didn't mean tin. He meant antimony.
According to this Consumer Reports, Texas has the highest arsenic in their rice.
That's interesting.
That's bad. Why is that? They have a lot of arsenic in the ground?
It's natural.
Okay. You know what I'd like to do now, Dickson?
We don't know. What would you like to do now?
I'd like to hear another case study from Daniel.
I think I would too.
I have another case.
Ow! How unusual.
Very good.
And I will say again, this is a fun case.
Okay. Let's go for it.
Remember last time that wasn't fun.
I'm going to take notes.
This was fun. This was fun.
And a little background. I saw a case similar to this when I was down in Lima in Peru, and it made me remember this case that I had seen previously, and I was intrigued by how similar it was. A lot of times it's really a similar story you get, and as I think about the case, it occurs to me, well, why is it similar? Because there are certain behaviors that are going to occur in this case, which, well, lead to the person acquiring this problem. Are we ready?
We're ready.
Okay. Shoot.
I am shooting. This is a 28-year-old single female, and she returns from a beach vacation that she enjoyed with her new boyfriend. This woman reports that she spent 2 weeks exploring beaches in Central America. Okay?
Dickson laughs.
She reports that she and her boyfriend often found beautiful, secluded beaches away from the typical tourist beaches. She's been in very good health, but noticed on her return that she had several small nodules, papules, on the front of her thighs. Bumps, she describes them. She initially thought these must be insect bites. These became very itchy. And then she started to notice that these red lines were forming that seemed to be radiating out from these bumps. She took Benadryl, but became concerned when she had the sensation that things were moving in her skin. Okay.
Should I continue to laugh? This is not funny, by the way. Don't get me wrong. This is a serious...
Well, as I say, it's fun because, as we're going to say, she's going to come to no great harm, and we're going to be able to address this problem.
And it's funny because this idea of crawling things, if you look on the internet, there's hundreds and hundreds of people who feel their things crawling around.
Oh, well, of course.
Right?
Of course.
It turns out to be
It's
nothing.
called entomophobia.
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 All right. Oh,
Is that it?
Are you ready for questions?
Well, I'll mention. I'll make an aside. The
did you
woman I
see?
saw in Lima she had traveled, I think, to Colombia. Now, this woman travels to Belize. I'm going to give you the geographical. This one we're talking about has traveled to Belize. The one I saw down there had traveled to Colombia and actually was a veterinarian doing things with reintroductions of monkeys.
This is our second case from Belize, Dan.
It makes you worry, doesn't you?
But
doesn't it?
It's not the same thing, is it?
No, it's not the same thing. And
I would be giving it away, wouldn't it?
Bot flies, right?
No, as people realize,
bot
there are certain tourist destinations that become hot at certain times.
Indeed.
Belize was really hot for quite a while. Costa Rica seems like it's become the hot place now.
That's true. That's true.
So where did you see this patient in
This was out in Colorado.
Colorado, and this patient presented to you, and these are these are the things you saw.
So right now, history of Presnos. I haven't examined her yet. This is remember, these are the symptoms.
Yep. All right,
So she is describing these symptoms to us. We haven't looked at her yet.
Okay.
I'll give you some more just background. She's a healthy woman. She doesn't have any past medical surgery. She doesn't report any allergies. Nothing exciting with regard to family history. She's not on any medications. She's using barrier contraception. With her boyfriend. She is sexually active. She lives by herself. She says that she only drinks alcohol socially. She works in an office out there. And she had that travel to Belize. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions that you guys might want to know?
Yeah, did her boyfriend also accompany her to the clinic and say, I have the same thing?
He did not come with her. But he didn't report the same thing.
Did not.
And this is a nodules on the front of the thighs only?
They're just on the front of her thighs.
On both thighs?
There was, I believe, one. Now we're going to get in physical. Several raised lesions on the anterior aspect of both
So
thighs.
when she was on the beach in these secluded areas, did she lie on the sand?
Yes, she did, Vincent.
And did she use
Did she ever
blanket?
tell the truth on the sand?
But not she does say she had a sort of a thin, it's like a Surrey fabric that she would wear, and then she would lay that down on the beach, and she would lay on top of it.
And did they stay at a hotel?
They did stay at a hotel, but she was very excited to let me know they went off to these secluded beaches. They didn't stay at those tourist beaches.
Of course not.
But the hotel had screens and air conditioning and all that, so we don't have insects flying in and out all night while she's
that's
sleeping.
interesting, because she is telling us she thinks these are insect bites that are just on her anterior thighs.
So was there any other physical appearance besides the bump? You said that she experienced itching and things that might have been crawling under her skin.
That's what she felt, and in the exact
What did you
areas,
see when you looked at the bumps?
Okay, when we looked at these bumps, what you saw was a small nodule, a small raised bump, and coming out from there was a curved red line. Shall I say serpiginous? So there were several nodules, and the different nodules had these serpiginous raised red lines coming out from them.
A single serpiginous raised line coming from each nodule, or multiple rays of
Let me just leave it
like
there.
a sun ray.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. That's pretty good, though, to leave it at that.
You're happy with that, Dickson?
I'm
You're extremely
with it.
happy.
I'm overjoyed.
All right.
I don't think you are, but I am.
No, you're the parasitologist.
Are you liking it so far?
I love
there's
it.
Still
I
some
love it.
some more questions that I would like to have people ask.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question. Oh, brother. I'm
You
going
have
to
a
ask
picture
a
of
question
these things?
about animals.
I never get to see the pictures.
Oh, that's a remarkable picture, by
Oh,
the
well,
way.
that's pretty neat.
I want to know whether there were any...
So some of them had multiple, but a lot of them were just a bump and then one serpiginous line coming out.
So on these secluded beaches, was there any other life form on the beach besides the two people?
Yeah, I specifically asked her about that.
And
And there were wild dogs. There were
wild what?
dogs.
Thank you.
There were wild dogs.
The jury will note that the physician said there were wild dogs.
Wild
That's
dogs.
kind of significant in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always thought that was sort of interesting, though. I remember when she told
What
me
did
that.
you
I'm like,
think
are
about
they
when she
just
said that?
wandering around?
Yeah,
these
exactly,
wild dogs.
exactly.
Like, what's going on?
What
you
the
know?
heck is going on here?
Yeah.
Did they bother them, the wild dogs?
No,
They
she
stayed
just-
away.
By the way, I must say that I used to do a lot of bone fishing in Andros,
Yeah, I remember that.
and there were wild dogs there too. But these wild dogs were the most different wild dogs anyone had ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
They would herd and chase bonefish up onto the beach and eat them.
They'd go in the water and chase the
They were
bones.
going into the water and chasing bonefish. Bonefish are incredibly fast swimmers, and they're elusive for a fisherman, or a fisher person, I should say. But these dogs were specialists. And it also was apparent that some of the dogs that were there last week were not there this week. And so we think that some of those dogs became shark bait.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, but the fact is that they weren't on the actual beach. They were in sort of ankle-deep water. Okay? That's where they spent most of their time, in ankle-deep water, waiting for a bonefish to come along so they could chase after it. These, on the other hand, these were beach-dwelling wild dogs,
Well,
Maybe
she's
not beach
describing
dog.
that she saw dogs.
and they were not off-putting in terms of, oh my God, there's a wild dog. I wonder if it'll attack me.
No, she didn't seem bothered.
Not bothered.
Bothered.
Okay.
She's bothered by this itchiness stuff. Going
I'll
on.
say that. Well, when you showed me the picture, that's
And
for
this
sure.
developed on her return or while she was there?
She didn't notice it until she came back. She came back and she noticed the bumps, and then later she noticed these extending, and I'll describe it, extending red lines. Start off just a small line, and then it was longer, and then when she looked the next day, it was even longer. So these red lines seem to be in the process of extending, and they're very itchy. And they are cosmetically quite upsetting, which, 28-year-old
And you saw her
woman
at this point. You saw these.
And I saw her at this point, and
these lines.
You've probably
and as I
told
was saying, it was great. I was down in Peru. I saw a very similar case, and I said, "This is great."
Yeah.
I think you've told us too much.
Well, yeah, but this is fine.
But
We
not
didn't-
the audience. The listening audience is
They will
still
get
in the
it.
dark.
They will get it.
You
I
think
hope
so?
so. I hope. Well, I mean, they might.
Yeah,
They might.
get it.
They might.
Okay, very good. We'll leave that at that.
Do you guys want to know about what she had to eat while down there?
Do
No,
we
I-
need to? I don't think so.
I don't know. I think I should mention that. I think that might be important.
She
If
ate
you'd
what?
like to tell us, you go right ahead.
Well, I did ask, and she did eat ceviche.
Ceviche.
Apparently, that was something
was a
that
big
was
deal.
quite. They had a plan. They were at one of these places where there was a plan, and every night at dinner they got
Ceviche?
ceviche.
So what is ceviche?
It's conch.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. No, it's a special raw fish dish. It's marinated in citrus juices and some spices.
I have had conch, and they call it ceviche. Oh,
Well,
but
I
you're
think-
right. It is a mixture of.
I think they were wrong in calling
fishes.
it that then.
Well, that's fine. People
Yes.
are wrong, and so we are wrong too, Dickson.
Now, did you eat your ceviche for lunch or dinner, Vincent?
I don't remember.
So
It used to be a traditional lunch dish because it was the fresh fish would come in and.
Well, it's a
If you
traditional
turn
Peruvian
around, just
dish.
interrupt this podcast just for the moment. That's the second time I've seen those ultralights. There are now ultralights going up and down the Hudson River.
Okay.
Just as to inform our listening
Is
audience.
it of any significance that ceviche is a traditional Peruvian dish?
In this case, no. I mean, that's just I think where it came from originally.
Because you had mentioned that you saw.
But it's become quite
case in Peru, right?
Yeah, so it may people should think about that. But it's become quite a popular dish in a lot of island locales.
Fresh raw fish cured in citrus juices and
Correct.
peppers.
It's quite delicious, actually.
What kind of fish do you usually have in it?
Ocean fish, not freshwater fish.
So I have had ceviche prepared with conch in certain Caribbean places. I don't remember which. It's so long ago that I've been there. And now after I've done these TWiPs, I don't go anywhere anymore.
Don't blame
You
you.
just stay here.
I stay here in New
No,
York.
you should
New
travel with a
Jersey.
parasitologist, for gosh sakes.
I don't want to travel with you. I'm not going anywhere. All right. Anything else we need to know?
I think that'll be good.
Jan, you wanted to tell us about the ceviche.
Right.
Ceviche is cooked, right?
No,
No,
it's
it is
raw,
raw
No,
fish.
it's marinated in citrus. It
Does she have any intestinal symptoms?
No.
I love saying
good-
intestinal.
No, and actually that's nice. She doesn't report that, which is, someone goes on vacation for a while, a good percentage of people will end up with some.
And she's
intestinal
HIV
symptoms.
negative, right?
Yes, she is.
So
HIV
this new
negative.
boyfriend, right? You said it was a
Mhm.
new boyfriend. How new
Yes.
is this guy?
Let's see if she tells us. She just says new. She doesn't give us
Did
exact.
he eat the ceviche also?
He did.
And did he also lie on the beach?
He also was on the beach with her.
Okay. That's good. I'm done. Anything from you, Dickson?
Nope, I've got my diagnosis.
All right.
Okay.
Let's read a few emails, okay?
Sure.
Just a few.
Yeah.
We have one from Robin, which I forgot to read last time.
Right.
He had sent in a guess for the man from El Salvador, and he said
yeah.
sounds like Chagas.
Yep.
Left heart failure without right heart failure may account for both the absence of reported dependent edema and the throat closing when supine. Listen to this.
I think supine.
supine.
Supine,
The throat hurting might be dysphagia related to loss of the nerves plexus of the esophageal musculature. Damage to Auerbach's plexus could account for constipation, sort of like a diffuse acquired Hirschsprung's disease. Of course.
So many termins, so little time.
Serologic test them can keep them out of the blood bank. Okay. Well, he was right because,
Yep.
yes, that was the answer. I'm sorry I didn't read it. Then he says the quote about one death being a tragedy and a million deaths being a statistic is routinely misattributed to Joseph Stalin. Its origin is unclear. And 2, scrubs should be used in areas where procedures are being done and should be forbidden elsewhere. No entering or leaving any medical facility in scrubs.
Okay.
Well,
There
we
you go.
see people in scrubs all over the place, right?
Going home on the bus.
Walking around here.
Sure.
People walk to the dorms here in
You bet.
scrubs and
You
back.
bet. It's a sort of a status
bus.
symbol.
What do you think of that, Daniel? Do you think they should not be worn outside?
I don't think they should be worn outside. There's an idea that when someone's wearing scrubs that they've just, cleaned themselves, these are freshly laundered. They're really not for walking around in the world.
No.
And so I worry about that. I don't know if they police that well at Columbia, making sure that you put on scrubs that have been freshly laundered, and I don't think so.
Dickson, can you take one
Sure.
from
Peter writes, "Hi, TWiP team. I thought this paper from Parasites and Vectors would be of interest. It says, not every worm wrapped around a stick is a guinea worm. A case of Onchocerca volvulus mimicking Dracunculus medinensis."
Are you surprised, Dickson,
No, of course not.
that one mimics the other?
Not always, but in this case they did.
They mistook one for the other. That's
They
what
did.
I'm saying.
That's
Does that
it.
happen?
Occasionally.
All right. I'm trying to get this paper up
Not
here.
often, though, because Onchocerca volvulus nodules don't usually occur around the ankles, which is where where Dracunculus medinensis does occur. And likewise, medinensis does not induce a nodule, so it's not often mistaken for each other.
Okay. This
All right.
this journal, by the way, is called Parasites and Vectors,
I see that.
and it is it's out of Cameroon.
Right.
The origin of HIV-1. Did you know that's where it jumped from chimps to humans in
You know, I heard
1920?
Dr. Hahn's lecture on
Yeah.
that, and it was quite good, actually.
So despite being certified guinea worm free in 2007, they still continue surveillance. This paper reports field
Sure.
work carried out to investigate a guinea worm rumor in Cameroon, which turned out to be Onchocerca volvulus, mimicking Dracunculus medinensis.
Right.
So the worm was retrieved from the patient by wrapping it around a stick. Right? That's the way they pull it out. But in this case, it wasn't Dracunculus. Usually they pull it out of the foot wound, right, Dickson?
Or close to that, out of an ulcer that it creates. So Onchocerca doesn't create ulcers. So I'm wondering
It's a fun paper, actually.
just how that
Check
came
it out.
about.
All right, it's just a mistake. It scared everyone because they thought it was eradicated, but it still is.
Right.
Daniel, you take Dylan's.
Where's
This is a
Dylan
good one
writes?
for you, Daniel.
I was going to skip that one, but
You want me to skip
Dylan. No, that's okay, Dylan. I'll read it. What's your opinion of flagging patients as delusional when they bring their physician suspected parasites? It seems that many of the symptoms or signs of what to look for with suspected delusional parasitosis is the same behavior and actions one would take if they were actually infected with the worm. I'm including a link to a couple of photos of one of the large flukes that I brought to my doctor, only to have them inquire where I got the vial that it was in and to be diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive behavior. It's a challenge, actually. I think when you have a concern, you should go to your physician. Hopefully you have a good enough relationship that they can determine whether or not this is a parasite. But, some people who think they have parasites can have other issues as well.
But Daniel, if you go to a good physician and the physician says you do not have an infectious disease, you need to believe them, right? Or am I putting too much trust?
I'm thinking there's a tautology. It's a good physician. I think that if you go to your physician and that they tell you don't have a parasite, and you don't believe them, you probably need to make sure that you've chosen a physician who you do trust. Because there's a lot of training and a lot involved in becoming a physician. So you want to go and find a physician that you can have a trusting relationship with.
You could get a second opinion, right?
Yeah, I think that's
now, what
reasonable.
if you get two opinions that say both you have no infectious disease? Should you then start to think that they're probably right? What if you got three and no dissenting opinions, and they all said you have? And by this point, you're spending a lot of money.
Yeah. No, I think.
You're just sending emails because I get a lot of those all the time.
Yeah.
No, I get a lot of emails.
In fact, we do get quite a few, and I've told Daniel I don't read them.
Yeah.
But people send photos like these, and they believe they have things crawling under their skin. Some of them, in fact.
I mean, they have a disorder, but it's not a parasitological disorder.
Yeah, and that's fine. A lot of people have they'll have pruritus, they'll have things that itch, they'll have other things they're concerned about. Yeah, I mean, your goal of going to physician isn't to say, tell me if it's parasitic. Your goal is really to go to physician and say, this is what's going on. Can you diagnose? Can you guide me in what I should do next?
Right. I mean, I can't trade the experience I had as a technician here for anything because of what I saw just in passing. And the one I remember most was, indeed, it was a middle-aged woman with lots of scabs all over her face and in other places too. And she claimed that she had picked these parasites out of those lesions. And she brought the jar in with her, a little vial, right? So we looked at this little vial, and Roger Williams was a medical entomologist, and he says, I know exactly what they are. And Dr. Brown says, and Dr. Williams, and what are they? He said, they're carpet beetles. Carpet beetles. They're tiny little round beetles.
Yeah.
And she claimed that they came out of these lesions. Well, of course they didn't. They did not come out of the lesion, and she found them to justify the lesions that she had created by her own scratching. So she was a troubled woman who needed psychiatric evaluation. And unfortunately, people that think they're infected and get the wrong diagnosis, in their opinion, keep wandering throughout the medical community, seeking that one physician that will agree with her and start treating and collecting lots of money too, I might add. Those are the physicians that no one wants to go to. And they're on the fringe of normal medical behavior. In fact, they're over the line. And there were a few in New York City that actually fell into that category. So it's not an unusual pattern of behavior. And so I was going to mention a recent event like this. This is
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. This was they shall remain unnamed, but I knew all the people involved because they found me at home. And I was listening to what was going on. And the son of the parents said that when he had this bowel movement and he looked down into the toilet before flushing, he found all these wriggling worms, and that he thought he was infected with these worms. And I said, did you save any of them? He says, oh, yes. I said, oh, good. Would you mind sending them to me? And he says, well, I don't know how to get them to you, because he was all the way up in Westchester County. So I said, well, why don't you take them to a physician at the nearest hospital? and they will take them to the parasite laboratory or the diagnostic laboratory, and they will photograph them, and then they can send me some images. Well, son of a gun if they didn't do that. They went to the emergency room. The emergency doc immediately took the specimens to a small laboratory where they had a petri dish. They filled it with water. He put the specimens in there, and he took pictures with his cell phone. Imagine that.
No,
it was fantastic. Right. He sent me the pictures. Guess what they turned out to be?
Earthworms?
No, but you're not far off. These were midges. They were aquatic insects that breed in water. They lay their eggs. The eggs hatch. They develop into larvae. The larvae develop into pupae. The pupae pupate. They hatch, and these things fly off. And they're not microscopic, but they're pretty small. Now, of course, this was not a worm. It was an entomological thing. It couldn't possibly have come from his stool. So the big question that remains unanswered is, A, if these were alive and had passed through his alimentary canal, because he claims that he got them from eating sushi 4 days prior to that. And I said, did you have any diarrheal disease? And he says, no. I said, did you have normal bowel movements for those other 3 days? And he says, yes. Well, Dr. Griffin, what is the normal gut transit time for a meal?
It's about a day.
About a day. So if you had sushi 4 days ago, and you claim that these worms, in quotes, were coming from that meal, that's impossible.
Not likely.
Okay, so that immediately raises a red flag and says, so there's something else going on here. Number two, he hadn't been home in years. And I presume, although this is an assumption on my part, that he was using his old bathroom in his old room. Mm-hmm. And that's hasn't been used in years. So this maybe is a breeding site for these midges. And thirdly, if he had swallowed these larvae from a contaminated water source, they would have all been dead when they came out of his anus in his fecal matter. And thirdly, which was the most important of all of them, let's say, for instance, that he did swallow these larvae, and he produced a normal bowel movement. Guess where the larvae would be? Stuck in the normal bowel movement. They wouldn't be free swimming in the toilet. So on all counts, everything was wrong with this case. It was a crime scene investigation case, and the parents were microbiologists. They should have all known better. They should have known that this is not what's causing it.
You can fool almost everyone.
Well, that's right. But I presume that he was relieved to find out that they weren't parasites. I hope he was, at least.
All right. Scott writes, Dear Day Twippers, here is an interesting paper on a newly discovered antimalarial protein found in mosquitoes that has some potential for use in a vaccine. I would be interested in your comments on it during the podcast. So he sent a Science Daily article. So I searched this paper, and it's in fact in July JBC, Journal of Biological Chemistry. It's called Anopheles midgut protein mediates plasmodium invasion. So he identifies a protein called FREP1 that is secreted from the mosquito midgut epithelium, and this can bind Plasmodia sexual stages, and ablating expression with antibodies decreases P. falciparum infection in mosquito midguts. So yeah, that would have some vaccine possibilities.
That's an altruistic vaccine, I would call that.
You would. Why is it?
Because it would prevent the next person from getting it, not this person. Unless everybody that was vaccinated made the same antibody. But
that's correct. It would prevent the next person, so the mosquito wouldn't be able to transmit it.
That's right.
Are we going to make altruistic vaccines like that?
Well, we thought about that, actually. We had a vaccine directed against the gametocytes at one point, which only occurs inside the mosquito.
And also antibodies against salivary proteins, another one which we talked about here on Twitter. So this depends on them showing some preclinical data for it, right?
Yeah, you'd have to. This is a long way from.
We are a long way off.
You bet.
All right. I think we're back to Daniel. We have
Robin writes, with regard to the question of why mammals have non-nucleated red blood cells, while the other classes of vertebrata do. Mammals emerged about 150 plus million years ago, nearly contemporaneously with the reptiles, but were presumably homeothermic from the outset. This demanded higher metabolic rates that were partly fulfilled by denser networks of smaller capillaries, which in turn required smaller and more flexible erythrocytes. Discarding the nucleus allowed for a reduction in size without a corresponding loss of hemoglobin and with the additional benefit of enhanced flexibility. The downside to homeothermy was limitation of body size imposed by those much warmer climates through constraints on thermoregulation. As the poikilothermic dinosaurs got bigger, homeothermy in the Saurischian dinosaurs and the bird descendants was presumably a rather late development, and the evolution of denser networks of smaller capillaries with their concomitant of non-nucleated erythrocytes. A chance happenstance in our lineage has not occurred in them.
Well, we should put a little caveat here because camels have nucleated red cells, but they're kind of an outlier group of mammals. But so birds have nucleated red cells, but they're oblong-shaped red cells, though, right? They're not round like ours. They're they're oblong. So maybe that's because they don't have to deform. They can go through the capillaries that way. I don't know. Interesting.
Dickson, can you take Ola?
Yes, I will. I will take Ola. Ola writes, Dear Twippers, hope you are all well. Well, I can speak for myself. I'm well. How are you feeling, Vincent?
I'm well.
And Daniel?
I'm doing well.
We're all well then. I'm writing you to ask whether at any point you have covered the subject of microRNAs found in secretory products of nematodes. I've searched through the Microbe World website but couldn't find anything relevant. Do you think the fact that immunomodulatory microRNAs were found, for example, in H. polygyrus or Helicosmoides polygyrus, suggests that they are used by other parasites? This is probably mediated by gene splicing. I'm sorry, I'll start again. This is probably mediated by gene silencing by microRNAs. But how about the other genetic material? How about transferring messenger RNA or DNA to the host? What do you think about it? Also, can you think of any potential therapies if microRNAs turned out to play a big role in the parasite world? I am very curious of your opinion on this.
Hola.
Right, which they would say in Spain, of course. So what do you think, Vincent?
Well, there are plenty of microRNAs in parasites of all sorts, and there are even secreted microRNAs, which are secreted in like small vesicles called exosomes by parasites, including
do you think this
nematodes.
could be modulating the immune response?
Sure, it's an extensive literature, but our understanding of what these are doing, even in mammalian cells, is rudimentary. We don't know a lot about it, but there is a big literature. I did look this up in parasites, and they could be immunomodulatory. They could be transferring all sorts of things to other cells. Potential therapies, if they turn out to play a big role. Well, I'm sure they play a big role. I'm sure they modulate gene
Can you make an
expression.
antisense?
You could
microRNA?
if you found one that was particularly important for, say, pathogenesis or invasion, replication in an insect host. You could certainly antagonize it. Absolutely. I think it's really early days in all of these microRNA fields, and we haven't actually talked about this on TWiP, but we shall, Dickson.
I also learned that there's a new class of RNAs called piRNA, and you said that stands for peewee?
Peewees.
That's even smaller microRNAs?
Peewee RNAs? You want to know?
Yeah, just a little taste of what that might be all about.
piRNAs. Okay, let me just go to the videotape here. So they're called PI or peewee interacting, PIWI interacting. They are the largest class of non-coding RNAs produced in animal cells. And they interact with peewee proteins. That's why they're called piRNAs.
What is a peewee protein?
It's a certain kind of RNA binding protein that is associated with these, but not other kinds of small RNAs. All right, and there are
what
many.
Do? Just hold them at bay until they're needed, or what is the purpose of the PI protein?
They are only found. So these piRNAs are only found in testes and ovaries in mammals.
Really?
They only seem to be required in males. And so that's a little hint there. We don't know a lot about them. You want to know what the binding protein is doing? I don't know what that's for.
Or even with the
probably.
piRNAs.
So the peewee complex is pRNA complex. In other words, the RNA is linked to the proteins.
Yeah.
That's the functional aspect.
It's a hybrid molecular arrangement.
These have not been as well studied as microRNAs and small RNAs in other systems. But there are a lot of these. piRNAs, standing for Pee-wee interacting RNA. Okay. Our last email is from Heather. Hello, doctors. The conscientious eradication of most overtalking has greatly improved the TWiP listening experience. Thank you. Here's an article you might like to address on a future TWiP. And she sends a link to an article on a blog and a news site. Cat parasite found in western Arctic belugas. Found Toxoplasma gondii in beluga whales in the western Arctic.
Oh, my.
Dickson, how did it get into belugas?
That's a good question. Belugas feed on fish, as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And fish are not usually infected with toxoplasma. So toxoplasma come from felines. Okay, the oocysts of toxoplasma would be the environmental resistance stage that could possibly infect sea mammals like otters, for instance, in the West Coast. But this is Western Arctic, so this is still in the same general region. Although I'm totally unfamiliar with the range of a Western beluga. I know the Eastern belugas go up the St. Lawrence Seaway, pretty far up, as a matter of fact. But Western belugas, are they restricted to the Arctic Ocean? Do they ever get down between the straits of the Bering Straits and get into the...
Well, I don't know, but I can tell you that these samples that they studied were obtained from Inuvialuit hunters, Inuits.
Oh, so those are on the peninsula. Those are on the Bering Strait Islands, the Aleutian Islands. So, okay.
And 14% of the animals were positive for toxo.
14%.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So they just said they have to make sure they cook the meat well before they eat it.
Well, the other question is, of course,
these individuals eat it.
What do you think the source is for that?
That's a good question.
I'm going with cat urine. I mean, there's a lot of pet cats, and that's the mechanism
Urine
we're seeing.
Or feces?
And that's the mechanism we're seeing in the West Coast and some of the mammals there.
So they're talking about warming climate,
so
releasing
I'm saying
parasites.
which cat mammal would be responsible for
is it pet cats or is it wild cats? It might be pets and feral.
These guys are thinking that ice melts is explaining this, but I don't understand what in the ice would be releasing it.
No.
No, I don't think
Are there
so
lots
either.
of cats frozen in the ice?
I don't
Hope
think so.
not.
I don't think so. I have no answer. Just questions.
The Beaufort Sea. That's where they sampled
Beaufort
you know where the
Sea.
Beaufort Sea is?
Well, we'll look it up. It's got to be somewhere around those islands.
Where's the Beaufort Sea?
Oh, you must know where
Is it
that
above the Aleutians or below the Aleutians?
Marginal sea of the Arctic Ocean. Here it is.
Probably above it.
It's above Alaska.
Yeah, above Alaska, that's right. So it's in the Arctic.
Wow.
Basically, it's in the Arctic Ocean.
I don't know if there's a lot of pet cats in Barrow and Prudhoe Bay.
No, there can't be any. There can't be any.
Dixon, you ever been in the Arctic Ocean?
No.
Have you, Daniel?
I don't think so, no.
I'd love to go.
Wow. It's amazing.
Yeah, I do watch the Most Dangerous Catch, though. I do watch that.
I don't know where these came from. That's the most interesting question.
True, because belugas are usually territorial and they stay put in a given region. And so maybe there's been an invasion of some animals, like lynx, for instance.
What do they
Lynx.
eat? What do they eat, belugas? Just fish, you said?
I think fish.
Because they say they've also found them in gray seals in the North Atlantic.
They eat fish.
Toxo.
They eat fish as well. Yeah, but they're not felines. They wouldn't be spreading the infectious stage, though. That's the point. They have to catch it from something.
And there's no jerds up there.
There's
to
no
worry
girds
about
or jerds.
Jerds.
All right.
None.
On that note,
Just words.
Jerds. J-I-R-D.
J-I-R-D-S. Yeah, let's get the spelling correct on this one.
All
Jerd.
right.
J-I-R-D.
It's a TWiP.
It's like a little desert rat. It looks like a little desert
Okay,
rat.
we don't need to
Kangaroo
revisit it. It's
rat.
okay.
They're
It's
very
okay,
cute.
Dixon.
They're
They
adorable.
look like gerbils.
They're adorable.
TWiP, you can be found at iTunes and at microbeworld.org/TWiP. Please send us your questions and comments to twip@twiv.tv. Daniel Griffin is here at CUMC, which stands for Columbia University Medical Center. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure.
It used to be called just Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And about
then it was
6 years
College
ago.
of Physicians and Surgeons,
So that's
right?
College of Physicians and Surgeons is the medical school of Columbia University, and then we had Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. And then about 6-7 years ago, before you came, they decided they needed to brand themselves. So they paid a company a lot of money to say, what name should we give to this medical center? And they came up with Columbia University Medical Center.
Yeah, how unique.
I could have told them for no money at all.
Exactly. Or for half of what they charged for the other one.
Yeah, I bet they paid a few $100,000.
No, they did. Right? You know they did.
Dickson
Despommier is at Racaniello.org, medicalecology.com, and also verticalfarm.com. The potter of Vertical Farms. Thank you, Dickson.
You're welcome, Vincent.
And I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. The music you hear on TWiP is composed and performed by Ronald Jenkins. Check him out at ronaldjenkins.com. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. Another TWiP
is parasitic.